In the cold-shadowed hollers of Appalachia, where land was measured in acres and a man's worth was tallied by what he owned, nobody could explain why Eli Caldwell did it. He sold the ridge with the white oaks, then the bottomland by the creek, then the house his father built, plank by plank, after the war. Piece by piece, he stripped himself of everything a Harlan County man was supposed to protect: his property, his legacy, his pride. Folks whispered he'd lost his mind. Others said the mountains had finally broken him. But the truth was stranger, quieter, and far more dangerous to tell. Eli wasn't running from debt or shame. He was selling his entire life for the chance to marry the one woman everyone else pretended didn't exist, the girl they called the ugliest in Harlan County, the woman no man looked at twice, the woman whose face made children stare and grown men look away. And as the deeds changed hands and the gossip spread like wildfire through the valleys, one question haunted the coal camps and church pews alike. What kind of man gives up everything to choose the one thing the world has already decided is worthless? The first time Coleman Briggs saw Vera Mae Hutchins, she was standing in the creek behind the old Pentecostal church, her dress hiked up around her knees, catching crawdads with her bare hands. She was singing something low and sweet that he couldn't quite make out over the water's babble. And when she straightened up and saw him watching from the ridge, she didn't look away or blush like most girls would. She just stared right back with those eyes of hers, one pointed slightly east, the other holding steady, and smiled with that crooked mouth that showed too much gum on one side. Coleman was 26 years old and owned 3 properties in Harlan County, Kentucky: the old Briggs home place with 40 acres of timber, a rental house down in town that brought in $40 a month, and a little store building on Main Street that he leased to a barber. His daddy had left him well fixed when the black lung finally took him, and his mama had followed 6 months later from what the doctor called a broken heart, but what Coleman suspected was just plain tiredness. People in town said Coleman could have any girl he wanted. He was tall and straight-backed, with his daddy's strong jaw and his mama's kind eyes. He didn't drink except on Christmas, went to church every Sunday, and had all his own teeth. Martha Jean Patterson had been making eyes at him for 2 years, and she was pretty as a spotted pup with honey-colored hair that fell past her waist. The widow Morrison had a daughter just turned 18 who played piano at the Baptist church and could make biscuits that floated off the plate. But Coleman had seen Vera Mae in that creek, and something in him had shifted like a landslide after a heavy rain. "You gonna stand there gawking, or you gonna help me catch these crawdads?" Vera Mae had called up. To him, her voice rough and sweet like creek gravel and honey mixed together. He'd scrambled down that bank like a fool boy, half his age. Vera Mae was 23 and lived with her aunt in a leaning cabin up Rockhouse Creek. Folks in town didn't say she was ugly out of meanness. It was just stated as fact, like saying the sky was blue or winter was cold. Her face was too long and too narrow, with a chin that came to a sharp point and cheekbones that jutted out like they were trying to escape. That wandering eye had been there since birth, along with a port wine stain that covered half her forehead and crept down past her left temple. Her teeth were crooked as a rail fence, and when she smiled, which was often her lips pulled back in a way that some people said looked almost animal. She was also thin as a willow switch, with hands too big for her wrists and feet that seemed like they belonged on someone else. Her hair was the color of mud, and it grew in patches where scarlet. Fever had taken it when she was 12. But Lord, could she laugh! It started deep in her belly and rolled out like thunder across the hills. And it made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny. And she was smart, not book smart necessarily, though she could read and cipher better than most, but smart about people and animals and the way the world worked. She could look at a sick cow and know what herb to give it. She could read weather in the way the leaves turned on the poplars. She knew every bird by its call and could whistle them right up to her hand. "That Vera May, she's got the gift," old Mrs. Stamper said, and people nodded because everyone knew what that meant. Some people had the gift of healing, or the gift of finding water, or the gift of knowing when death was coming. Vera May's gift was harder to name, but everyone felt it. She could make you feel seen and known in a way that was both terrifying and comforting. Coleman started finding reasons to walk up Rockhouse Creek. He needed to check on the timber, he said, had to see about a property line, was thinking of clearing some land for tobacco. Vera May never seemed surprised to see him. "You lost, Mr. Briggs," she'd say, that crooked smile spreading across her face. "Just out walking," he'd answer, and she'd nod like she believed him. They'd sit on the porch of that leaning cabin, her aunt conveniently always needing to be somewhere else, and talk about everything and nothing. She told him about her mama, who died bringing her into the world, and her daddy, who'd worked himself to death in the mines before she was 5. She told him about living with her aunt, who was kind but tired, and about the garden she kept, that grew tomatoes big as your head. He told her about the loneliness of inheriting everything too young, about missing his mama singing and his daddy's rough laugh. He told her about the weight of people's expectations and how sometimes he felt like he was playing a part in someone else's story. "Maybe you are," she said, looking at him with that steady, wandering gaze. "Maybe you gotta write yourself a new one." By September, everyone in Harlan County knew Coleman Briggs was courting Vera May Hutchins, and the talk ran through town like floodwater. Has he lost his mind? Must be some kind of hex on him. That Hutchins girl's got him bewitched, sure as I'm standing here. Martha Jean Patterson cried for a week and then married a boy from over in Bell County. The widow Morrison's daughter stopped playing piano at church and took up with a coal company man from Virginia. Coleman's friends sat him down at the barber shop, the one he owned, which felt both ironic and intrusive. "Cole, we're saying this because we care about you," said Jimmy Bentley, who'd been his friend since they were 6 years old. "You're making a mistake." "You could have any girl in 3 counties, added Robert Mills. "Why would you choose?" He stopped, seeming to realize there was no polite way to finish that sentence. "Choose what?" Coleman asked quietly. The men shifted in their seats. "She's just... Cole, be reasonable. Think about your children. Think about what people will say." Coleman stood up, put on his hat, and walked out. He didn't go back to that barber shop for 3 months, and when he did, nobody mentioned Vera May again. His second cousins tried a softer approach. They invited him to Sunday dinner and sat him down with fried chicken and guilt. "Your mama and daddy, God rest them, they'd want you to be happy," said Cousin Eleanor, who'd never had a kind word for his mama while she was living. "I am happy," Coleman said, "but are you thinking clearly? A man in your position, with your assets, you need to think about building a future, about having a family that can hold their heads up in town." "I am thinking about my future," he said, "and Vera May's in it." They didn't invite him back after that. The worst was the preacher. Reverend Stokes called him into his office after service one Sunday, sat him down in a leather chair that wheezed when you moved, and spoke in that careful voice preachers use when they're trying to guide you toward what they've already decided is right. "Coleman, I've known you since you were baptized. I watched you grow up to be a fine young man, and I know you have a good heart." "Thank you, Reverend. But I'm concerned about this relationship with Miss Hutchins. Have you prayed about it? Really prayed?" "Every night." "And what has the Lord told you?" Coleman thought about Vera May's laugh, about the way she listened like every word he said mattered, about how she saw straight through to the true parts of him that he'd been hiding from everyone else. "He told me she's the one," Reverend Stokes sighed. "Son, sometimes we mistake our own desires for the Lord's will. The Bible tells us not to be unequally yoked." "We are both believers, Reverend." "That's not what I mean, and you know it. I'm talking about compatibility, about the practical matters of life, about what's fitting and proper." Coleman stood up. "Is there a scripture that says a man can't marry an ugly woman, Reverend? Because I can't seem to find it." The preacher's face went red. "That's not... I'm trying to help you, Coleman." "Then be happy for me, sir, because I'm going to marry her, and I'd like to do it in your church, but I'll do it in a field if I have to." He walked out, and his footsteps echoed in that empty sanctuary, like a promise. In October, Coleman went to see Vera May's aunt, a dried apple of a woman named Judith, who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 3 children that weren't hers. They sat on the porch in the cooling air, and Coleman stated his intentions plain. Judith rocked in her chair for a long time before speaking. "You know what you're asking for?" "Yes, ma'am." "You know what people will say?" "I do." "And you know my Vera May. She's had a hard road. People can be cruel. She's learned to live with it, but it's marked her deep. You bring her into town as your wife, some of that cruelty's gonna splash back on you." "I know." Judith stopped rocking and looked at him hard. "Why? And don't give me some poetry about love. I want the truth." Coleman thought about how to answer. Finally, he said, "Because when I'm with her, I'm the man I always hoped I'd be. She doesn't see what I own or what people think of me. She sees me, and I see her, all of her, not just a face. And what I see is the finest woman I've ever known." Judith's eyes got wet. "She loves you something fierce. You know that?" "I hope so." "It ain't hope. It's fact. She tried to talk herself out of it, tried to push you away for your own good. But love don't listen to reason." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "You have my blessing. Not that Vera May needs it. She's a grown woman. But you have it anyway." When Coleman asked Vera May to marry him, they were sitting by the creek where he'd first seen her. It was November now, and the leaves were mostly down, making a copper carpet over everything. He didn't have a ring yet. He wanted to know what she'd say first. "Vera May, "I'd like you to be my wife." She didn't answer right away. She picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in those big hands of hers. "You sure?" she finally asked. "You've thought it through? Because I won't have you waking up one day wishing you'd chosen different, I'm sure. People will talk. Let them. Your children, our children, they might not be pretty. They'll be ours. That's all that matters." She looked at him with both eyes, the steady one and the wandering one, and he saw tears tracking down her face, cutting lines through the port wine stain. "I never thought anyone would want me," she whispered. "Not like this. Not for real." He took her face in his hands, careful and gentle. "Then you never looked at yourself the way I do. How's that? Like you're the prettiest thing in Harlan County." She laughed that thunderstorm laugh and kissed him, and that was that. The problem was the money. Coleman had always been comfortable, but he'd never been rich. His properties brought in steady income, but not enough to set up a household the way he wanted. He wanted to buy the old Harrison place, which had a good house with a real foundation and enough land for farming and livestock. He wanted to fix it up nice for Vera May, with glass in all the windows and a wood stove that didn't smoke. He wanted to have something in the bank for when children came, so they'd never want for anything. He did the arithmetic a dozen times, but it always came up short. So he made a decision that had everyone in town talking even more than the engagement. He sold the rental house, sold the store building, sold 40 acres of timber off the home place, keeping just the house and 5 acres around it. He sold his daddy's good watch and his mama's wedding ring, though he bought them back from the buyer 2 weeks later because he couldn't stand it. When it was all done, he had enough to buy the Harrison place outright and still have money for improvements and savings. People said he'd lost his mind. "Selling off his inheritance for an ugly wife," they whispered. "It ain't natural. She must have some kind of hold on him. His daddy's rolling in his grave." But Coleman didn't care. He bought the Harrison place, and he and Vera May and half a dozen men from up Rockhouse Creek, men who'd known Vera May all her life and loved her for who she was, spent 3 weeks fixing it up. They replaced boards and patched the roof and whitewashed the walls. Coleman installed a kitchen pump so Vera May wouldn't have to haul water from the creek. He built her a chicken coop and a smokehouse and started clearing ground for a spring garden. When it was ready, he carried her over the threshold, and she cried again. "It's too much," she said. "It ain't enough," he answered, "but it's a start." They were married on a cold December morning with 10 people in attendance. Vera May's Aunt Judith, 3 of her cousins, Coleman's friend Jimmy Bentley, who'd come around after seeing how happy Coleman was, and a few others who'd decided that love mattered more than convention. Reverend Stokes had refused to perform the ceremony, so they'd gotten a Methodist preacher from over in Leslie County who didn't know either of them and didn't care what anyone looked like. Vera May wore a dress her aunt had made, simple and clean, with her patchy hair pulled back as best it could be. Coleman wore his daddy's suit, taken in at the waist. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Coleman kissed her like she was the most precious thing on earth, because to him, she was. The wedding dinner was at their new house, with food brought by the guests and music from a fiddle player who lived up the creek, They danced in the front room, and Vera May's laugh filled up all the empty spaces. That night, lying in their own bed in their own house, Vera May said, "Are you sorry? Even a little?" "For what?" "For giving up so much." Coleman thought about his properties, about the money and the status and the easy life he could have had. "I didn't give up anything," he said. "I traded it for something better." "What's that?" "You. Us. This life we're building." She kissed him then, and outside the window, the December wind sang through the bare trees, and somewhere in the darkness an owl called, and the world turned on like it always had and always would. Years passed the way they do in the mountains, slow and fast at the same time, with each season bleeding into the next. Coleman and Vera May worked their land and raised chickens and a milk cow. They planted gardens that grew vegetables enough to eat and sell. They were careful with money but not stingy, generous with neighbors but not foolish. And they were happy. Not the shouty, performative happiness that some people wear like Sunday clothes, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly who you're supposed to be with. Vera May bloomed in a way that had nothing to do with her face and everything to do with her spirit. She became known as the woman to see when a child was sick or a cow needed help birthing. People who'd once whispered about her ugliness started seeking her out, sitting on her porch, asking for her wisdom. Coleman found that he didn't miss the properties he'd sold. The Harrison place gave them everything they needed, and more importantly, it gave them room to build a life together. He started working at the sawmill 3 days a week for steady money, and he found he liked the physical work, liked coming home tired and finding Vera May waiting with supper and a smile. In the second year, Vera May got pregnant. The whole town watched to see what kind of baby would come from such a union. Some people wagered it would be the ugliest child ever born in Harlan County. Others, kinder souls, hoped it would favor Coleman. When Vera May went into labor on a hot August night, her Aunt Judith and 2 neighbor women attended her. Coleman paced outside like expectant fathers have done since the beginning of time. And when he finally heard the baby cry, he felt his knees go weak with relief. Judith came out holding a bundle wrapped in one of the quilts Vera May had made. "You got a daughter," she said, her face unreadable. Coleman took the baby carefully, terrified he'd drop her or break her. He pulled back the quilt to look at his child. She was wrinkled and red, as all newborns are, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the world. She had Coleman's strong jaw and Vera May's high cheekbones. Her mouth was perfect and pink. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She is," Judith said, and she was smiling now. "She surely is." They named her Ruth after Coleman's mama, and she grew up sturdy and strong and smart as a whip. She had her mother's gift for understanding people and her father's steadiness. And yes, she was beautiful in the conventional way, but more importantly, she was beautiful in the way that mattered, kind and brave and true. 2 years later came a son they named Samuel, who had Vera May's wandering eye, but none of the cruelty that often followed such things. He was gentle with animals and could make anything grow. People said he'd inherited his mother's gift, and maybe he had. Then came Martha, who was homely as a mud fence, but who could sing like an angel. And finally James, who was handsome as his father and clever as his mother, and who became a teacher and taught 3 generations of children in a one-room school up Rockhouse Creek. Coleman and Vera May grew old together in that house on the Harrison place. Their children grew and married and gave them grandchildren, and the house was always full of noise and love and life. People in town stopped talking about the ugly wife and the fool husband. Instead, they talked about the Briggs family, how solid they were, how their children turned out so well, how you could always count on them when times were hard. On their 25th anniversary, they sat on the porch in the cooling September air, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you remember when I asked you if you were sorry?" Vera May asked. Coleman took her hand, still too big for her wrist, still strong and capable. "I remember." "Are you sorry now?" He looked at her, at the face he'd loved for a quarter-century. The port wine stain had faded some with age. The wandering eye still wandered. The crooked teeth were still crooked, though she'd lost a few to time. Her hair was more gray than brown now, still growing in patches. She was, by any conventional measure, still an ugly woman. She was also the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Not for a single second," he said. "Best trade I ever made." She laughed that thunder-crack laugh, and somewhere in the valley below, someone else started laughing too, the sound carrying up through the twilight. "What did you trade again?" she asked, teasing. "I forget." "Everything I thought I wanted," he said, "for everything I needed." The sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Somewhere, a dog barked. A train whistle echoed up from the valley. A whippoorwill started its evening song. And Coleman Briggs, who'd sold everything he owned to marry the ugliest girl in town, sat on his porch with his wife's hand in his, and knew that he was the richest man in Harlan County. Because he'd learned what some people never do, that beauty is the easiest thing to see and the hardest thing to understand. That a face is just weather passing over the landscape of a person. That real beauty lives in the laugh that makes you want to laugh too, in the hands that gentle a sick calf, in the spirit that sees you truly and loves you anyway. He traded properties for love, and money for happiness, and the good opinion of people who didn't matter for the devotion of the one person who did. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat. The stars came out one by one, and the night birds started singing, and Coleman and Vera May sat together in the darkness, two souls who'd found each other against all odds and reason, and who'd built something fine and true and lasting from nothing but love and work and faith. And if that ain't a story worth telling, then there ain't no stories worth telling at all.